This is my 2024 Honolulu race breakdown video where I completed my second marathon ever. I got a 3:14:56, and for my second marathon, I'll take that. This wasn't an all-out effort. It was an all-out effort in the second half, but my first half I was definitely conserving because I was pacing Brooke. And Brooke, by the way, finished with a 3:26. So for her, that is amazing, like absolutely bonkers for a first marathon for her. Almost a BQ. It would have been a BQ last year before Boston and the BAA raised up the qualifying times. And even though our times were kind of hard to decipher because everything was in minutes per kilometer on the Honolulu Marathon website, and there wasn't a switch to make it into American units, even though I'm all for metric units, I just wanted to see my pace in minutes per mile on the website, but you can't see that, so I have to like translate everything. But here were my splits for the 5K, 10K, and so on. My goal for this race, other than to like pace Brooke as well as I could, and I think I did a great job, even though we didn't have a lot of communication like during the race as like motivation. She didn't really want me to do that. She was like locked into her headphones and just wanted to go and just feel her effort out herself. And then I left her at around like 13 flat. But overall, I want to talk about what time I woke up. So going into race day, this was 5 a.m. Hawaiian time, which is 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is where I live in the Eastern United States. So this wasn't that early of a race. At least my biological clock didn't think it was that early of a race. I woke up at around 3:30 a.m. I didn't eat any big breakfast that morning because I carb loaded pretty well the 2 days before that. And I only had a gel with 100 calories and like 30 grams of carbs that morning, and I felt ready to go. Heading to the start line, it was like less than a mile walk, but there was so many people. It's 30,000 people at the starting line, and this was my first race ever going with that many participants. My first marathon only had 200 people completing the marathon. This one had around, I think, like 18,000, 19,000 completing the marathon. So a completely different scale of people, and you felt that going to the starting line. It was just a ginormous crowd, something I've never seen before in a race. The line for the porta potty that Brooke and I got into, we literally waited for 50 minutes, and this caused us to be late to the start. And we didn't start, like the race started exactly at 5. That's when the fireworks were going off. Energy was super high, and people are just admiring the fireworks. Like, wow. While Brooke and I were trying to push through all of the walkers and the super slow joggers, and we got to the starting line at 5:06. And then even from 5:06 in the starting line, we were pushing, going side to side through the crowd. Like, I wish I could see like an aerial view of like, I don't know, like next gen stats, similar to like NFL players, on like the distance between me and Brooke, because it was going in between like 5 meters to 4 meters, then back to like 8 meters, 20 meters at one point, down to 2 to 1 meter if we were super close. We were bobbing and weaving, especially for the first 2 miles, but we really weren't like hitting a pace where we were like just controlling it ourselves up until like mile 5. And I'm sure this would have been prevented slightly if we were super early and used the porta potties like way earlier. But man, that porta potty line was the first time I ever experienced that, and that was just brutal, just waiting there forever and just wanting to, get to the starting line and get in the race pack or get towards the front, because we both knew that we were going to be like one of the first marathoners to finish out of like the entire group, at least in like a higher percentile. I think we were at least definitely top 20th percent, if not like maybe top 10, top 5, because there's a ton of people that just like walk and jog this thing. But overall, the weather was hot. It started off at 70 degrees, 71 degrees nighttime, and I just started sweating so much right out the gate. During the race, I wasn't actively thinking about the heat. It didn't feel like the heat was hindering me that much, but it just felt like the sweat was pouring out of me every single second of the race. And then towards the end, when it was just like 78 degrees and the sun was starting to shine in your face a bit, I feel bad for anyone who finished after me, because the sun was just glaring in their face for not only just a couple minutes, but probably for hours if you're like a 5-hour to 6-hour marathon finisher. That sun out there, brutal on the Hawaiian Islands. So finishing at 78 degrees for a marathon, hopefully that is the hottest marathon I ever do. unless I do like an ultra in Death Valley or something, because I'm going to avoid that heat as much as possible. The elevation of the course wasn't that much. It was my first time doing a marathon, really, because it was only my second marathon, but my first time doing a marathon where I only knew like 5 to 10% of the course, and that was honestly like kind of fun, but also strategically you just can't take any tangents because you really don't really know where the corners are coming up and all the little like mini inclines here and there. Like towards, I think like mile 15 or 16, you go over this like city bridge that I had no idea was coming like at all, and I'm just like, okay, here it is. I'm finding this out for the first time, and you just roll with it. Going into this race, I was about 12 pounds heavier than when I PR'd in my first race, and I got that 257 like 30. This was mostly muscle because I've been strength training pretty well, very consistently, eating well for the gym and building muscle. So I think the majority of that extra 12 pounds of weight was muscle. There might be some pounds of fat in there, but majority is muscle because my body composition looks and it feels just like more muscular in general. Not as thin as I was earlier this year when I completed that first marathon. I was 188 pounds then, and now I'm like 199, 200. So definitely way heavier, but I still ran fast, and I was 2 minutes and 2 seconds away, according to Strava, from my half marathon PR. And this was kind of my goal going to this race, was to get this half marathon PR. I know factors were against me, like doing a 13-mile warm-up, the things we did before leading up to this race. But for all those factors that I'll get into, 2 minutes and 2 seconds or 2 minutes and 4 seconds away from my half marathon PR that I set doing my first marathon, I'll take that. And I do want to say that I almost achieved that half marathon PR by doing less mileage, less speed work than my first marathon build. My first marathon build, I peaked out around 77 miles, and my second most marathon block was like 75 miles, so I was getting really high in mileage. But this marathon block, I did less speed work, barely did any speed work, did some marathon pace intervals and long runs, but not that many. My first marathon block, I got up to 23 miles. This one I got to 20. I'll set up a huge, nice looking bar graph here. And I only peaked at 60 miles. My taper went into 60, 50, and then 41. And then the week of, I did like, I think 15 miles or 16 miles before the race the week of, and that felt all right. I was also staying in a hostel for the very first time in my life for this race, and I was barely getting any sleep, not only because the bed was like super squeaky, but also there was no AC. And for me, my body just doesn't really like sleeping in 75 degrees. Like, I was wearing the lightest material possible, a tank top with super short shorts, and I was still sweating throughout the night and barely got any sleep. So for me, that hometown race is going to feel so nice when I get to sleep in and be in my own bed, or just be in a nice bed in general, because for future marathons, I'm definitely going to pay money for the convenience of a hotel room or Airbnb with a nice bed and AC, because this trip I found out that those two factors are very important for me to get sleep. And also, 3 days before the marathon, I did the toughest hike in my life. I climbed up to 2,600 feet, going from, I think, like 500 feet down all the way up to 2,600 feet. Super cool hike, but it was definitely strenuous. It took 5 to 6 hours, and my heart rate was definitely pumping at certain times. Like sometimes, like climbing up a wall with like ropes, my heart rate would get to like 150, 160. And even when I was just like casually going up an incline, my heart rate was like at low zone 2, high zone 1. So that effort was probably not recommended for someone about to do their second marathon, but I got it done. And this marathon, I really wanted to focus on several mistakes I did in my first marathon. One was listening to music in my first marathon, because my mind just kind of gets overwhelmed with filming content, which is kind of narcissistic that I do it. But I am filming content because for me it's fun. But also, like, race strategy is a lot to think about while you're running, and you just want to like really just be in tune with your body, and music kind of distracts from that. It's fine if you're on your own doing a long run, especially if you're going at slower paces. But when you're racing, it for me, music for a marathon, you just don't need it. Even though there wasn't that much crowd support, there was a lot of crowd support under an overpass, and then once you loop back towards the starting line. But outside of those two major places, there just wasn't that much crowd noise. Like, there was almost equal crowd noise to my small town first marathon race to the Honolulu race, which does make sense because Honolulu isn't a racing town. It's not like Boston or New York City or Chicago that takes like big pride in the race. Honolulu is just kind of like, oh, you're just traveling for a marathon, have fun. So the crowd noise surprised me to the downside. And quickly touching on the fact that I gained like 12 pounds of mostly muscle, going into my first marathon, I never did a single leg day. I only started doing leg days and squats and deadlifts like this year. So definitely a lot of that muscle cut is coming from my legs, and I could see the definition more. But did the leg days help me for the marathon? Sort of. This was my longest run ever, my farthest run ever, because of all the bobbing and weaving. I got my farthest distance I've ever achieved. Did it help? I don't know. I mean, I was cramping super badly at the end in the last like quarter mile. My calves were actually like super tight, and I could not do a full stride without like just cramping even more. So this was, I've always heard stories of like calf cramping, but this was my very first time in my life. I've never experienced this in like 5Ks and cross country or my first marathon. This was the first time, partially because of the heat, I think, that my calves were cooked. They were done. And talking about the carb load quickly, I ate a lot of like direct whole food carbs such as bagels, rice, and pasta. I didn't really drink too much fructose because Eric Floberg tried that out and it failed for him. So I think I had like a couple sips of an apple juice. I had a mango naked, which I did my first marathon. So those are two things I did again along with the Olive Garden carb load. So those could just be staples for every carb load in the future. I do believe in the carb load. My Brooke also carb loaded. She didn't carb load all the way to the recommended amount, which is like 8 to 12 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight. For me, that's 700. For her, I think it was like 500. She almost got there, but it was also the first time she was trying to eat that many carbs in her life. And even for me, I love eating food, but carb loading like that, it is really tough, especially when you're trying to do other tourist things and do a bib pickup and do a shakeout run with 1,000 people with the Raw Dog Run Club. When you're trying to do those other things, sometimes it's hard to maintain focus on carb loading, but I was able to maintain focus, and I think I did a good job carb loading. Another mistake I did on my first marathon that I didn't do in this marathon was going out too fast. I almost did the opposite. I went out too slow, and this was just because of the crowd. I literally couldn't move anywhere for the first 2 miles. Like it was rough, and I was like going on the middle of the road on the grass. There was this one part where like I dived like 3 feet, like literally because like a curb like just jumped, like dropped down like sharply. So I think because of that like bobbing and weaving, my ankles were super sore for a couple of days after the marathon. Unlike the first marathon where my ankles were fine, it was just like my hamstrings and my quads. But this time my hamstring and quads were mostly fine. Like I still can't run. And it's been a couple days after the marathon. I'm going to try this weekend for the first time. We'll see how that goes. But next week I should be back to normal. But my ankles were just ruined. I do have the eventual goal of running 50 marathons in all the different 50 U.S. states, similar to what Wyatt did this Honolulu Marathon and completing his challenge, but he did that in 1 year, which is super crazy. Congrats to him. I'm going to be trying to do it over my lifetime in the next 30, 40 years. So this was state number 2 for marathon number 2. Glad I got this one out of the way because Hawaii is hard to travel to. I'm sure I'll be back there again, maybe not for the Honolulu Marathon. There's not like too much in me that wants to do that marathon again. Maybe the Maui Marathon, or maybe just to travel for a future honeymoon or just marriage vacation. Why not? Or maybe with my future family. We'll see. But for future running plans, I think I'm already signed up for the Tallahassee Marathon, my hometown college race, for February 2nd. I'm hoping for cold weather for this one. I haven't ran, my 2 marathons have both been above 60 degrees. The first one was at 60 at the start and like 65 at the finish, and then this one was 70 at the start, 78 at the finish. So I haven't ran a marathon yet in the ideal marathon weather, which is like 45 to 55. So hopefully I get that this time when I run the February 2nd marathon. And my plan for a while was to run this marathon in Crocs because I thought it would be fun. I already ran this course before. I have nothing to prove. But because Brooke did so well, she is in position to BQ in the Tally Marathon because she's also signed up for it. And there's just so many factors that could lead to a better time for Brooke. Not only is that there's way less people in the Tally Marathon, so we're not going to bob and weave for the first mile or 2 miles. She wasn't wearing carbon-plated shoes, which is sort of insane, but she will be wearing carbon-plated shoes for the Tally Marathon. It's going to be her second marathon, so she already has the experience and confidence that she can complete the 26.2 miles. And the sleeping situation with the lack of AC is something that she was battling as well for the Honolulu Marathon. So she's in position because she got a 3:26. She just needs a 3:25 to start applying for the Boston Marathon. But with the cutoff, it's a little bit of an unknown. I'm going to guess it's going to be like a 3-minute cutoff. So she'll have to run a 3:22, 3:21. And if I want to match her with a BQ in Tally, I'm going to have to run a 2:52, 2:51. Is that going to be very difficult with just an 8-week marathon block? For sure. Am I going to do it? Probably not. But I would say right now, if I ran the Honolulu Marathon race with all my effort, I probably would have gotten like a 3:03, 3:04. I think that's the type of shape I'm in. And if you give me good racing conditions, I think I'm like at a 3:01, 3 or 2:59, like around there. So I think with 8 dedicated weeks and getting the mileage up above 60, for a couple weeks in there, it's going to be challenging, but I'm going to try and push for at least a 2:55 in Tally. Forget the Croc strategy, probably do that for another marathon in the future. I know I'm going to run more. Marathon running is challenging for sure, and I was wearing the medal all throughout the airport. I got some congratulations from everyone for the medal Monday, and it was a time. The goal going into it was to have fun, and then it turned into like me racing it at the end. So racing is fun. It's just fun and challenging. I got myself grittying at the end. I was on TV technically, but yeah, that was my 2024 Honolulu Marathon race, and definitely more things to come.